Have you ever entered a conversation with a clear grievance, only to leave it feeling like the offender? This subtle transition from victim to villain is not an accident of language, but a highly coordinated psychological maneuver. It is a specialized form of social alchemy that transforms the weight of accountability into a weapon against the innocent. We often assume that a shared language implies a shared reality, yet some use words as a smokescreen rather than a bridge. In these exchanges, facts are treated as obstacles to be dismantled, while emotional reactions are harvested to fuel a new, distorted narrative. The individual finds themselves defending their tone, their memory, or their character, while the original issue vanishes into the ether. This leaves the observer in a state of cognitive vertigo, a dizzying sensation where the ground of objective truth seems to liquefy. The person across from you remains remarkably calm, projecting an image of stability that makes your growing confusion feel like evidence of instability. They do not argue the merits of the case. They instead audit your right to bring the case forward at all. It is a masterful redirection of focus, moving the spotlight away from their actions and onto your perceived flaws in judgment. This creates a vacuum where responsibility should be, filled instead by a suffocating cloud of doubt and misplaced guilt for the victim. The mystery lies in how a simple dialogue can be inverted so completely that the truth becomes a casualty of the process. Why does the human mind struggle so profoundly to maintain its footing when its reality is systematically denied by another person? We are witnessing a quiet war of perception, where the goal is not to reach an understanding, but to achieve total narrative dominance. Observers of human nature have long been fascinated by the way certain individuals use charm and intellect to mask an underlying void. Carl Jung once noted that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a deeper understanding of our own internal architecture. In the context of narcissistic behavior, this irritation is not merely a nuisance, but a signal that a psychological boundary is being crossed. Thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer suggested that human interaction is often a struggle between competing wills, where the strongest ego dictates the terms. This pattern is a hidden mechanism used by those who view vulnerability as a terminal threat to their carefully constructed self-image. They operate on a frequency that prioritizes the preservation of a perfect facade over the actual health of any interpersonal connection. It is a survival strategy born from a deep, unacknowledged fear that being seen as flawed is equivalent to being destroyed entirely. By turning a conversation against you, they ensure that the flaw is always located within your perception, never within their own actions. This mechanism is so effective because it exploits the natural human desire for harmony and the innate tendency to doubt oneself. We are about to peel back the layers of this linguistic trap to see how the mind of a narcissist builds its defenses. The core of this mechanism begins with the individual's inability to integrate their own negative traits into a cohesive sense of self. Sigmund Freud described the ego as a mediator, but in the narcissist, the mediator has been replaced by a ruthless propaganda machine. To protect the false self, the mind employs a series of rapid-fire psychological defenses that trigger as soon as a slight is perceived. The primary tool is projection, where the individual's own undesirable feelings are cast outward and attributed to the person they are speaking to. If they feel a flicker of shame, they will manipulate the dialogue until you are the one apologizing for making them feel that way. This is often facilitated by a mental shortcut known as the availability heuristic, where they focus only on information that supports their superiority. They do not process your words as information, but as incoming projectiles that must be deflected or returned with greater force and precision. Robert Greene, in his analysis of power, notes that the ability to control the framing of a situation is the ultimate form of leverage. The narcissist frames every disagreement not as a problem to be solved, but as a direct assault on their moral or intellectual standing. This high-stakes environment prevents the mind from engaging in rational deliberation, opting instead for a scorched-earth policy of emotional manipulation. They use a process called splitting, viewing people as either entirely for them or entirely against them, with no room for nuance. Because they cannot tolerate being wrong, the mind rewrites the history of the conversation in real time to ensure they remain the hero. This neurological bypass allows them to lie with the conviction of someone telling the absolute truth, as they believe their own revision. The target's brain, meanwhile, is overwhelmed by the gish gallop, a technique of burying the opponent in an endless series of false arguments. By the time you have refuted one lie, they have introduced 3 more, each more personal and distracting than the last. This exhausts the victim's prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical reasoning and emotional regulation in high-pressure social moments. Eventually, the target collapses into silence or anger, which the narcissist then points to as proof that the target is the difficult one. It is a perfectly closed loop of logic that serves only one master: the preservation of the narcissist's fragile and unyielding ego. In modern life, this behavior often appears as gaslighting in a romantic relationship, where a partner denies a shared history to evade blame. They might say, "I never said that," with such cold certainty that you find yourself searching your own memory for a malfunction. In the workplace, it looks like a manager who takes credit for your work, but blames you for the minor details of its execution. When you attempt to set a boundary, they frame your professionalism as a lack of team spirit or an emotional overreaction to stress. Socially, it manifests as the friend who always turns your struggle into a story about their own, much larger, and more tragic problems. If you mention your exhaustion, they remind you that they haven't slept in years, effectively silencing your need for support and validation. Digital communication amplifies this, as the lack of tone allows the narcissist to interpret every text as a hidden insult requiring retaliation. They might respond to a simple question with a wall of text detailing every mistake you have made since the inception of the friendship. This creates a state of walking on eggshells, where the victim constantly edits their own thoughts to avoid triggering a narrative inversion. The narcissist uses the silent treatment as a punctuation mark, a way to show that your attempt at communication has been deemed unworthy. By the time the silence breaks, the victim is so relieved that they forget the original issue that caused the friction in the first place. These behaviors are recognizable because they all share a common goal: the total erosion of the other person's confidence in their own reality. It is a form of psychological colonization, where the narcissist seeks to replace your internal voice with a recording of their own grievances. The target begins to perform a preemptive apology, apologizing for things they haven't even done yet just to maintain a fragile, false peace. This dynamic is not merely a social inconvenience. It is a systematic dismantling of the target's sense of agency and self-worth over time. Beneath these interactions lie hidden patterns of power that the narcissist reinforces by exploiting the empathy of their targets and social circles. They are often expert impression managers, ensuring that to the outside world, they appear as the most patient and reasonable person alive. This creates a second-hand gaslighting effect, where mutual friends wonder why you are so upset with such a seemingly kind and thoughtful individual. The narcissist understands that social capital is a shield, and they use it to isolate the victim from any external sources of validation. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the opinion of others is like a light wind, but for the narcissist, it is the only air they breathe. Because they lack internal validation, they must harvest it from others, often by making those others feel smaller or more flawed. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of ressentiment, a sense of hostility directed toward an object that one identifies as the cause of one's frustration. For the narcissist, the cause of frustration is anyone who reminds them of their own mortality, fallibility, or ordinary human limitations and needs. Confidence in this context is a performance, a loud and colorful display meant to distract from the hollow resonance of their inner world. They use emotional control not to manage themselves, but to manage the reactions of everyone in their immediate orbit at all times. If you show a glimmer of independence, the narcissist perceives it as a desertion, triggering a narcissistic rage that feels out of proportion. This rage is a tool of domestic or social engineering, designed to train you to never challenge the prevailing narrative of their perfection. The mind of the narcissist is a closed system, unable to take in new data that might require a change in their behavior or perspective. They view knowledge as a weapon to be used for leverage, rather than a tool for shared understanding or collective growth and harmony. Over time, these patterns combine to create a folie à deux, a shared madness where the victim accepts the narcissist's delusions as reality. Breaking free requires the victim to stop seeking logic in a place where logic has been intentionally discarded in favor of dominance. It requires a radical acceptance that the narcissist is not speaking to you, but is speaking to a character in a play they wrote. The brutal realization is that the narcissist's behavior is not a choice they make with malice, but a cage they cannot see. They are biologically and psychologically incapable of the empathy required to see the pain they cause through their linguistic and emotional inversions. This does not excuse the harm, but it explains why your attempts to explain your feelings will always be met with more deflection. The human mind protects its identity at all costs, and for the narcissist, their identity is synonymous with being blameless and always right. They are limited by a profound lack of object constancy, the ability to maintain a positive emotional bond during a period of conflict. When you disagree with them, you cease to be a loved one and become a temporary enemy who must be neutralized or defeated. This realization is brutal because it means there is no winning a conversation with a person who views conversation as a battlefield. The mind protects itself from the truth by convincing the narcissist that everyone else is manipulative, a classic case of psychological projection. They cannot perceive your sincerity because they do not possess it themselves in the way that healthy, integrated individuals do in social life. We persist in trying to reach them because we project our own capacity for empathy onto them, hoping for a breakthrough that never comes. But the break never comes because the narcissist's entire world is built on the foundation of never allowing a breakthrough to happen. To admit to a single mistake would be to let the entire structure of their personality collapse into the void of their hidden shame. Thus, the cycle continues, not out of strength, but out of a desperate, clawing need to remain the arbiter of all social truth. This brings us to the moment of reflection, where you must turn the gaze away from the narcissist and toward your own heart. How many times have you sacrificed your own truth on the altar of someone else's comfort or their demand for perfection? Do you notice the moments when you begin to doubt your own memory because someone else's voice is louder and more certain than yours? Introspection is the first step in reclaiming the ground of your own reality from those who wish to occupy and redefine it. Every human mind is vulnerable to the lure of certainty, especially when it is offered by someone who seems so sure of themselves. Ask yourself if the peace you are maintaining is worth the cost of your internal clarity and your sense of personal dignity. We must examine why we stay in these dialogues, hoping for a resolution that the other party is fundamentally incapable of providing. Is it a desire for justice, or is it a fear of the loneliness that comes when we finally stop trying to be understood? To reflect on this is to realize that you cannot change the narcissist, but you can change your participation in their linguistic games. You can choose to stop being the mirror that reflects their false glory and start being the witness to your own lived experience. The antidote to this psychological trap is the cultivation of a quiet, unshakable intellectual and emotional honesty within one's own self. By practicing radical curiosity about why we feel the need to defend ourselves to those who will never listen, we find the exit. Humility is not about making yourself small. It is about knowing your own truth so well that you don't need to argue it. When we recognize our own limitations, we stop trying to be the fixer of people who do not believe they are broken in any way. This awareness leads to a healthier relationship with the self, where validation is internal rather than harvested from the outside world's shifting moods. We escape the trap by refusing to play the role assigned to us in the narcissist's drama, stepping instead into our own light. Learning to say, "I know what I saw," and leaving it at that is the most powerful sentence in the victim's new vocabulary. It is an act of reclaiming the mind from the influence of those who use words to obscure rather than reveal the human condition. The final insight is that the narcissist's power is entirely dependent on your willingness to engage with their distorted version of the world. When you stop providing the fuel for their narrative, the fire of their manipulation begins to flicker and eventually dies out for lack of air. Human nature is a vast and complex landscape, and not everyone is interested in exploring it with the same level of integrity or care. As Marcus Aurelius observed, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury, and that begins with staying true to reality. The silence that follows a departed narcissist is not a void, but a sanctuary where the truth can finally be heard and felt again. Reflect on the conversations you carry, and decide which ones deserve your energy and which ones are merely traps for your soul. Share your thoughts in the comments below, for in the naming of these patterns, we create a community of those who see clearly.